Hey beautiful friends, Jill here. Welcome back to Whispering Willow Farm. It is a lovely spring day here in Arkansas. I'm outside checking on my tomatoes. I plan on doing a little bit of pruning, and so I really wanted to take this opportunity to show you guys how easy it is to prune your tomatoes. This is something that I do every single year. I am even considered a heavy pruner, and what I mean by that is, one, I'll show you, but just kind of talking through that, is I am taking off majority of the bottom foliage on my tomato plants, and I am leaving just a few leaves over the clusters as they're getting bigger. I will do more in-depth videos as my tomato plants begin to grow and kind of show you an example of pruning at each stage. I feel like that would be really beneficial, but I do heavily prune, and I do that for a few reasons, honestly. One, I deal with a lot less disease, and that is because I'm allowing a whole lot of airflow to take place and air circulation for my plants. So therefore, I don't really deal with a whole lot of disease. I can recall a couple years ago in one of my beds I had blossom end rot, but other than that, I don't really have a lot of disease and fungal issues in my tomato plants. I more so have to worry about, you know, the pests and the aphids and things of that nature. But I also find too that when you're pruning and you don't have as much foliage, it's a lot easier to check your plants. It's really not that big of a deal just to lift up a leaf here and a leaf there and check to see if there's any sort of pest on there, and then just easily remove them, especially if you are doing, you know, a natural organic pest control. A lot of times I joke that my hands are my pest control, which is true, and so pruning just makes that a lot easier. And so I really wanted to show you guys, because I know for me, I didn't realize that pruning was a thing, if I'm being completely honest. It was probably several years into my gardening journey that I realized people prune their tomatoes. When I think back to my Papa Kenneth's garden growing up, which is one of the first gardens that I actually have a memory of as a kid, one, I don't remember him ever pruning his tomatoes, and if he did, he never talked about it. And so that's something that I would love to kind of pick his brain about now as an adult gardening, like, hey, did you do this? Yes, no, why you did, why you didn't. Now there are some tomatoes that you don't need to prune, and that would be determinate varieties. They prefer, you know, they are bushier plants. They actually do better if they're not pruned. So you will need to figure out if your tomato is a tomato that would benefit from pruning, and if so, I'm going to show you guys just how easy that is. So you will need some sort of pruner, or if your suckers, which I will tell you what that is in a minute, are really small, you can just use your hands and pinch them off. Now before I jump into actually showing you how to prune your tomatoes, I want to mention this, because when you are pruning your tomatoes and when you're looking at your tomatoes, you're probably going to see one or two things. You're going to see a single stem or a single leader tomato plant, which means you caught all those suckers in enough time that they didn't actually V and go into a double leader tomato plant. Now I do have both in my garden. If I can catch it early enough, I prefer to have a single leader tomato plant. If I can't, and it's a 2-liter, that's okay, but I'm going to show you guys an example. These tomatoes I've actually already pruned, so I'm just going to show you this as an example of what a single-liter tomato plant looks like and what a double-liter tomato plant looks like. So here we have our single-liter tomato plant, and you guys can see what I mean by that is that there's just one main stem of the tomato plant. Now over here I have a double-liter. And what has happened is, you can see I have the main stem of the plant, but then this is V'd off, and now I've got this main branch, and then I have this main branch, each of which are producing clusters of fruit. So that's okay. What I would do in this instance is I'll just tie each leader up to the trellis and it'll be fine. But what happened here is this is a sucker that I didn't catch it enough time, so it created this double leader. But if I can catch it, I do prefer to keep mine at a single leader. It's just a bit easier. So if you come out into your garden and you're starting to look over your plants and you notice some are single and some are double, that is okay. It is really just a preference thing. However, if I can catch it in enough time, I do prefer just to have a single leader. It's easier for me to prune. It's easier to kind of stake up and maneuver around. The double leader, it just takes a bit more thought when you're trying to trellis it to things, but it's not like, oh my gosh, my plant produced a double leader. Like, this isn't a good tomato plant. That is certainly not the case at all. There is a lot of flexibility with it. Alright, so here I have my tomato plant, which already looks like it's getting some damage from a bug. So what I do is I am going to remove majority of the bottom foliage. Now this is not a super bushy plant, but I am just going to go through. I'm actually going to take my fingers because these are pretty small, and I'm just going to remove these. Before I do that though, I really wanted to show you this because this is what really you will be paying attention to. This right here is called the sucker. If you look right here, I actually have a better example just because it's bigger. You guys can see right here in the armpit of your plant, it kind of V's. This is where those suckers form, and all I'm going to do is just pinch that bad guy off. So here I have pinched this off. Now this is going to go in the compost because I actually do not need any more tomato plants. However, you can take this and pop it in a glass of water, and it will in a couple days start forming roots, and you can stick that out into your garden. Or for me here, we've had rain and overcast, so I could actually, since I know the ground is good and moist, I'm not worried about hot temperatures and it dying, I could stick that bad boy right there in the soil, and it will probably take off and produce a tomato plant. Now I don't need that, so I'm going to stick that guy out. But you're going to go through and just start removing the suckers of the plant. Here. Once I've done that, I'm going to remove the suckers. And then I'm going to go through and just start pinching off the bottom foliage. So now you guys can see here, the bottom of my plant is pretty bare. I have no suckers. There's good airflow. I've got a cluster of fruit here. I have a cluster of fruit up here. So this tomato plant is a really good example of, if you're not pruning in enough time, how a sucker is going to turn from a single leader plant to a double. So here I have right here, I'm just going to go ahead and pinch off the bottom foliage just so it's easier to work with. So I'm taking all of these suckers out. I'm pinching off the bottom foliage. You guys can see we've got a sucker here. Popping that guy off. I'm going to go ahead and get this one. Now I like a lot of my lower foliage to be off. I like for it to be bare. So you can see here in the armpit of the plant, guess what happened? A sucker grew. And I didn't pinch it off in enough time. So now what's happening? That sucker is actually producing clusters of fruit. So now since that's happening and I didn't catch this one in enough time, I'm going to let this be a double leader plant. So essentially what happens when you are pruning those suckers out, if you don't prune them like you guys can see there, the root system is going to put all of its energy into those suckers, because those suckers can actually be a production part of the plant. Those suckers can actually branch out, they can put on blossoms, which will then produce fruit. Plants are really smart and they know these things. So when you are removing all those suckers, instead of that root system sending up all of its energy, and now it is just really emphasizing on those blossoms, turning those blossoms into fruit, it's instead going to see all those little side shoots and think, oh, this could be a plant, this can be a plant. It gets really distracted, right? And it puts all of its energy into all of these other areas. And so I like to remove all of those suckers because, one, like I mentioned, airflow, air circulation, so much better. I'm dealing with a lot less disease. I'm able to check my foliage easier and hand remove those pests. It also yields fruit faster because it's putting its energy where it needs to go. So it's allowing those blossoms to produce the fruit faster, and then they ripen faster. You have higher yields. It's just super, super beneficial if you can kind of stay on top of it. And I find that a lot of people don't prune their tomatoes. One, maybe because they don't know, like what I talked about, or two, they think, oh, that's just an extra step. Is it necessary? I can go through, and if I'm doing it like often when I'm walking through the garden taking out a sucker, if I'm noticing a lot of lower limbs, I'm just going to go ahead and remove some of that foliage. It actually can be really simple, easy, quick step. It doesn't have to be an extra added step. Now granted, when I've got a ton of tomatoes going, I am having to dedicate some time to come out here, especially when they're big and there's, 10-foot tall tomatoes. Yes, it takes me more time to prune than these smaller plants you see behind me. But it is so beneficial that I would really, really recommend, if you're not pruning your tomatoes, maybe look into pruning your tomato. If maybe you are one of those people, I get this all the time, I've got these great, beautiful green plants, but they're not producing any fruit. Why? Well, are we pruning? Are we, eliminating some of the other things that the plant is putting all of its focus and energy on instead of actually just producing the fruit? It is super, super easy, super beneficial. I do also love the fact that when you are pruning, it really is just like free plants. If you are in a situation where you're needing more plants, or maybe you had more room in your garden than you thought, the idea of either buying a plant from someone else, maybe it's a store, a unique variety you found at the farmer's market, knowing that you can take that, root this bad boy in water, and then have another plant. I have done this every single year. This will be the first year that I've not taken the suckers and created a new plant. So I do think it's just a really cool, resourceful way to use what your plant's already giving you to kind of just double that goodness. All right guys, just like that, we've pruned tomato plants. It's easy, it's simple. Look for the sucker in the armpit of the plant. I promise, once you think of your tomato plant as having an armpit, you will always think of your tomato plant as having an armpit. I remember the first time I heard someone tell me that, I was like, the armpit of your plant? What are you talking about? And now it's like, oh yeah, so you look for the armpit. That makes sense. It really is just a really quick, easy, practical tip that you can implement in your garden that is just going to help with so many different things. So I highly recommend, if you aren't pruning your tomatoes, head out to your garden and prune your tomatoes. Trust me, you will be grateful for it. Your plants will probably be healthier and happier and produce better fruit. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll talk to you soon.